Ma'am. I thought the lady here was... No? There are a lot of people making vague gestures at me in that case. I thought this didn't happen in this part of Illinois. Bring it on.
Orwell and his role in the Spanish Civil War and Trotsky. I believe Trotsky himself was an anarchist. A lot of anarchists are coinciding with his non-conformist views and his values. Like, is that true? Did he take that kind of a role? I look at him and I say that he's critical of all states, capitalistic, democracy, socialist.
When you say he, in this case, do you mean Orwell or Trotsky? Well, if you don't mind a correction rather than a clarification, it would simply be wrong to say that Trotsky was an anarchist. That would be not the case. He was a Bolshevik possibly not till the day he died, but until about the last day he wrote anything. He regarded himself as a Marxist and a Leninist, and as the rival of Stalin for that role. I think he had a very libertarian streak in his personality, and it shows in his writing and his attitude to literature, and many other fine things about him. But no, his neither best friend nor worst enemy would say he was an anarchist. Of Orwell, it could be said that he was certainly could be said he was critical of all state systems. Yes, but his ideal, at least at the point when he died, Orwell's ideal would have been the British socialist welfare state of the post-war period, which he thought managed to combine a great deal of equality and fairness and redistribution with a great deal of personal liberty. And at that point, he was probably right. It probably hadn't been combined better in any European society before. And there are still many, many people in England who are nostalgic for it, even though there are very few who would now think of that as a model. That's what I mean by him being poised between our past and our future, in fact. I hope, you're looking quizzical at me, which I don't blame you for, I blame myself for.
I was going to say, I was pretty sure that when I was reading Trotsky, that in the Spanish Civil War, there were two forces, and actually three forces, socialists, the anarchists, and the
No, you'd have to make that four. Yes. Look, I'll tell you the best book to read on this, if you like. There's a book by Felix Morrow called Revolution and Counter-Revolution in Spain, written from a left opposite. Well, you should also read, actually it's the second best book, because the best book is Homage to Catalonia by George Orwell, which, can I take it that you've read? No. Well, it would be four forces. There was those who supported the Franco rebellion against the Republic, which actually were themselves made up of several forces: the Catholic Church, the Nazis, the monarchists, and some others. And then opposing this were several forces: the Catalan and Basque nationalists, the Spanish Socialist Party, the Spanish Communist Party, the Spanish anarchists, who were very strong in Catalonia, and the Spanish Trotskyists, the Partido Obrero Unificación Marxista, as they were known, the PUM, with whom Orwell fought, whose militia he actually joined in the Lenin barracks in Barcelona, of which there are photographs. And it's by the way, it's a brilliantly interesting story, and many people think that Homage to Catalonia is the best book ever written by a foreign correspondent. I still meet people when I go to Afghanistan or Bosnia or Kurdistan, people who are starting off in life and want to write about warfare and war and revolution. Men and women, and some photographers as well as writers, but almost invariably one of the books that made them want to do this is Homage to Catalonia. It's a fantastically good book, and it would clear up your misunderstanding about the anarchists. Well, some of it's overdue and some of it's unnecessary. Oh, the gentleman wants to know what I think about the Patriot Act. We're done with Orwell? I guess I'd be getting to the point where people would think I was avoiding the question if I went on saying that. I won't have that. I'll be quick on the Patriot Act. That the CIA and the FBI could not legally share information on conspiratorial nihilist organizations, which was the case, right, until 3 years ago. If they had information, they were not legally obliged to share it with the other. In fact, in some cases, they were prohibited from doing so, because the one policed foreign policy and one policed domestic policy. I don't think, I don't know, maybe I would get an argument here, but I don't think anyone thinks that that shouldn't have been stopped. There needed to be some new law to make that the same policy, okay, which is in conformity with the idea of a fight against holy war, because the war started on our soil, not on anyone else's. Unique in that way. There were other things that were put into the bill that I know the FBI has been wanting to put into every piece of legislation since the Clinton Anti-Terrorism Death Penalty Act of 95. For example, can't we just have roving wiretaps so that we only ask a judge once, and once he's given it once, we can apply it to any phone the guy ever uses, say? Or warrantless searches in public housing or things of this kind. They've always wanted that. Or looking at library records. And there was a big fight in Washington about whether or not to include these on the coattails. And some of these clauses have been grandfathered, so to say. In other words, they have to be voted on again. They're temporary. They're not part of the law yet. They have to be reconfirmed in another Congress. Some were struck down, and some are going to have to be redone. And I would only amend the Constitution, which I think is a perfectly good document the way it stands, one way, which is to say, Congress shall make no law within 6 months of any act of violence. Because all the worst legislation in our history has always come as a result of panic. And you'll generally find there's already enough law to punish people who fly airliners into skyscrapers. It's already illegal. An Orwell question. Never be afraid to speak up. Not for my sake, for your friends.
In the George Orwell book, in the nuclear book, does it hint, or did George Orwell himself have a hunch that the Cuban Missile Crisis would happen? And as a follow-up to that, did you hear, and I just saw this on LinkedIn, so this is news to me, that after the Cuban Missile Crisis, well after, JFK was going to make a secret deal with Fidel Castro. Of course, that was before he got shot down. Did you hear about that?
The question is audible to all. The first thing, I give up with Orwell what he might have said about this or that, roughly now, because he would have been 100 last year. And until recently, it was plausible to guess, because he died so young, but wrote so much, what he would have said. For example, I am practically certain, I can't be absolutely sure, but I've had this argument with many right-wingers, I'm certain that he would have opposed the American war in Vietnam, because he'd seen colonialism in Asia up close. He hated it. He knew a lot about it. He knew a lot about the French colonial role in Indochina. It would have been obvious to him the American war there was a successor to it. He would have been at least critical of that, probably earlier than most people were, because many people came to the war not knowing that's how it started. But so one can, with knowledge of his writing, one can push it to a certain point. I don't know what he would have said about Cuba, but I will say that it's against his theory, because his theory is that no, there is no accidental sudden threat of a thermonuclear war between the great powers, because that would suggest that they really meant that they hated each other, that they weren't just doing this to stay in power, that they weren't just running a Cold War that was about itself. I mean, if they were willing to kill everyone on the planet over whether Cuba was communist or not, that would have to mean they were sincere. Now, we don't want to make that assumption. Nor, in a way, should we, though it shows you how little fanaticism you need to do a great deal of damage. That the Kennedy administration signed an agreement with the Soviet Union that it wouldn't try to invade Cuba again is a matter of record now. They denied it then, but we know it's true. I mean, part of the stand-down over the emergency stand-down over Cuba was an agreement that the Russians would take their missiles out of Cuba, which they'd be very mad to put in there. And in return, or rather without mentioning it in the same breath, it wasn't supposed to be a bargain, but by coincidence, the United States would remove its missiles from Turkey, which was on the Russian border, and would undertake not to try another Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba. That promise, as far as I know, still holds, by the way. I think that is still a treaty with Russia, not just with the Soviet Union. So yes, you're right. But you should have left the assassination out of it, because it makes you sound weird. Or could, excuse me, I didn't mean that. Could possibly make you sound weird to someone who was only meeting you for the first time. Doesn't have anything to do with the assassination. Probably doesn't have anything to do with the assassination.
That we know of.
That we absolutely know, that they've let us find out about, yes. If Kennedy was not killed by Lee Harvey Oswald, if it wasn't a lone gunman job, which the overwhelming evidence is that it was, if it isn't that, if it was a conspiracy, it was certainly by his former associates in the mafia. That would be by far the next best theory. And he would have asked for it because he had used them and dropped them, and they don't like being used and dropped. Everybody knows that. And he shouldn't have been using them as president, should he? The nostalgia for Camelot is a continuing mystery to me.